And welcome back. We are going to go ahead and work now on improving our scene. We kind of nailed most of our core functionality with our game. So let's first start off by doing a quick check-in with what we have in our game design document. So with our game design document, I went ahead and brought over our key pieces here. So our core concept was we want to move a player along a smooth track to the finish line, which we have now done. We are using, of course, our surface effector to create kind of a conveyor movement, and so we can cross that one safely off the list. Our main features are that we wanted some snow particle effects to add a sense of realism, and we literally just did that in our last few lessons here. We have that triggering, for example, when we have the player hit their head, and of course we also added a particle effect for crossing the finish line. However, if you notice, one of the things we said is that we want to have some obstacles avoided or track changes that may cause the player to crash, and while we do have some of those track changes, we don't have much visual clutter that could distract the player. So this is one that we may want to kind of work on a little bit here, just to add a little bit of that fine tuning. And yes, we could say, well, there's track changes because there's ups and downs and stuff like that. Great. But this is something, again, that we can look at and how to improve. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And our target audience, we're still pretty good here. This is pretty much for everyone. It's a relatively relaxing paced game. Now we may have to adjust that pacing a little bit, but that is where we get into our topic, which is a little bit of fine-tuning. Now, when we look at fine-tuning our game, we want to make sure that ultimately we want our game to be as playable as possible. We don't want to make it a barrier for people to play it, because then obviously if no one can play your game, then it doesn't do much good. We want to always also seek to improve not just the gameplay, but the look and feel of the game. And this is typically done through feedback. It could be your own feedback. It could be other people's feedback. Now, these improvements that we do to our game, as we start doing more and more things that make our game really get to that high level of polish that we want, can really keep us motivated, because we can really start seeing things come together. Like when we first started our game, it's like, okay, we don't really have much here. It's like a blob on the screen, right? But as we start adding elements, we start adding particle effects, we can start seeing how these things can come together. Additionally, as we start doing these, this can also actually create additional ideas for a game, because we might say, hey, you know what, if I can do a cool particle effect for the crash or maybe for the finish line, what else could I do? Maybe I can have some kind of effect that's going to happen when we start the game. And we want to, as I already mentioned, fine-tune our player in order to improve the feel of our game, whether that's looking at things such as the gravity, the rotation speed, the movement speed, so on and so forth. We may also want to tweak our camera distance. If you notice right now, our camera is pretty close to our player, and so a lot of times when he gets near the bottom of a hill, we don't really see him. So we may have to adjust our camera distance just a little bit. And we want to add some of those background sprites, which is going to add some visual elements to really help make our game come to life. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and adjust our camera draw distance here. And so when I look at that, if I go to my follow camera right here, one of the things we have here, if we look at our different settings in here, we have a whole bunch of different settings that we can really kind of aim into here. But what things we want to look at is where are we having this draw? And so we look right now at our lens ortho size, for example. We can see it's like 7.3. So we can, for example, I make that 10. You can see it'll zoom out a little bit. Maybe I need to adjust. Maybe I can make it like 20. And you can see now we're really far out. So if I save that real quick and just see how that kind of looks in the game, I can kind of get a good feel for how does that actually look. So you may say, that's too big, that's too small, so you may have to come in here and kind of adjust that a little bit here for what we want. And so I think 20 is maybe just a little too big, so maybe I might try something like 15. That looks pretty good there. And then we also might want to change like the player, for example. We talked about some of our different things in here. So we had talked about things such as gravity in here. So if we look at our player right now, I'm just going to pull him up a little bit. And let's also take our finish line here. And since we're getting near much towards the end of the game, we're going to move our finish line all the way down to the end there, so we can have that set and ready to go. Maybe put this right here in the middle. Boop. There we go. And so now let's go ahead, and if we take our player and we just look at that gravity scale here, how does he look when he comes down? He comes down to see if he comes in and he's a little too bouncy for us, then we can say, oh, we need to adjust that bounciness. Or we say we don't want a little bit more gravity, we can do that as well. So for example, if I take my player, take that gravity scale and just change it to 2. You'll see he's got a little more oomph now when he comes down, so because gravity's got a little bit more power here, so that's pretty good. So we don't want to have it too crazy, but again, we can start going through here and adjusting some of these settings in here so that we can get a game that's a lot much more ready for us to work with. All right, so now that we get that set up, let's go ahead and look at our main camera start and look at our background. And right now the background's pretty dark here to kind of be out working the mountain. So we're going to kind of go with something a little bit more light gray here to kind of get kind of a nice background in here. That looks pretty good. And so now that this is set up, let's go ahead and if I just adjust this player to see how he's looking like he's hanging in there pretty good. And yeah, that's looking pretty nice. So now that this is set up, we can go ahead and start adding in some of our background assets here. So for example, I might say, you know what? I have all these sprites here that I went and created. So for example, here's this big tree that I have. Well, what do I want to do with that? I want to go ahead and just add that into my scene, right? So I'm just going to go ahead, start adding these in here. And of course, you'll notice that these are pretty small, which means that we have to go and actually look at our sprite, change the pixels per unit. So for example, if I make this, let's say 30, and hit apply, you can see now I have a much bigger tree here, and I can compare that to the size of the player, and we can say, oh, that tree needs to be maybe just a little bigger here. So we can of course adjust that easily just by adjusting the pixels per unit, and boom, we have a nice big tree for us to work with here. And then we can start duplicating this. We can bring other things in, such as our clouds. So maybe I want to bring one of these clouds in here, and again, same thing as before. If we want to adjust this, again, just work with your pixels per unit. So let's just say 25 on this one. And we can start scattering these kind of into our scene here a little bit. And you know, do the same thing with some rocks. We can put some rocks in our scene. So again, adjust the pixels per unit on this one. Let's make this one, let's say 30, apply. And then now you can see here's a rock. It's still pretty small here, so we may have to bring that one up a little bit. So let's maybe bring them up to 5. Boop. And then, of course, we got our other rock. I'm going to bring him in here as well. And let's bring him in. Let's do 5 pixels. Apply. Ooh, oh, that's huge. This one became really big. Do 50. And so we have, of course, some different rocks that we're, again, throwing into our scene here. And that one is pretty large. So we're just going to go ahead and adjust these. And you can start playing around and placing these into different places throughout your world. So let's just say 40. And as you start moving these around, you can start building your environments. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and pause the game here to go ahead and build these environments out here. One thing you'll want to do is make sure, of course, you have everything set to the right layer. So for example, if you want your rocks to be on top here, that's fine. But if you want your trees to show up like they're behind, you might just have to adjust what level your kind of background here, the level sprite shape is on in terms of our order. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, build this out. I want you to go ahead and do the same with your game. Go ahead and start building out your background here. Start putting some of those different sprites in here, put some trees and stuff, and go ahead and just build this out, and let's just see what you come up with. All right, so I went ahead and inserted a bunch of different things here. You can see I have this kind of cool cloud here, this kind of hanging out, adding some nice, almost visual fog effects here. And of course, I had some other clouds in here just to add some texture depth. Have my trees, a couple rocks in here, and this is really coming together pretty nicely here now when I look at my game. One thing I do want to do though is you can see I have a huge amount of things in here, and that can be quite cluttering. So what I'm going to actually do is I want to actually kind of clean these up a little bit. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come in here. We want to actually create an empty in here. All right, but you notice there's a lot of things in here. So what I'm going to do is I want to take all these and I want to create an empty that's going to put them inside of it. But notice I put a game object down here. That's not what I want. So I'm just going to come to the top, create empty, and it'll create an empty right here. You see there is an option to create an empty parent that we can see here as well. And that will automatically nest all those for it. And that's what I want. I want to create an empty parent. And so all these are now nested down here so I can easily keep these all organized. And I'm going to just rename this as environment. And that way this is all kind of cleaned up and I don't have to worry about accidentally moving something or accessing something I don't need to right now. Now, as we get ready to play our game, you might notice that we are still going to kind of play around with our different features here. We might want to fine tune this, adjust the speed, adjust some of this angular momentum, stuff like that. But one thing we do notice is that there can be a little bit of wonkiness still with the player. And that's because if we uncheck and go to our player, there's this thing right here called interpolate. And right now it's set to none. And we want to actually turn that on here. And what this is going to help do is going to help smooth out our game actually quite a bit here. in terms of just how some of this player is getting rendered here. And you can notice that even though it doesn't seem to have a huge effect, it does seem to be a little bit smooth. He's not quite so jittery, so to speak. And that's always kind of one of those settings that you might want to turn on here within your game. And I think from here, let's just go ahead and keep fine-tuning things until you get this where you want. But now we have a very nice visual presentation for our game.